Right. So my daughter's going to grow up with a father with one eye. And at some point she might say, I want one eye. Right? I identify as somebody with one eyeball. Which, by the way, is far less important than your gender, just physiologically speaking. And so if I take her to the doctor and I say, can you just enucleate that eye for us because she identifies as a one eye, she wants to be just like her dad. What would the doctor say? They'd say, you're crazy and I'm going to have you arrested. That is performing permanent physiological changes to children. We're just trying to stop it because it's crazy.
Gender-affirming treatments to young children. Let this sink in for a while. In this video, we show you how this delusional woke sprouted nonsense about gender-affirming treatments to young children and getting owned by 3 anti-woke heroes. They dismantling her arguments and exposing the absurdity of her claims for all to see. Ready to see how it will explode even more and more during the debate?
Gender dysphoria, the long-standing and significant distress that many transgender people have from the incongruence between their gender identity and the sex they have at birth, is real. It's a recognized and serious medical condition. Transgender people of all ages exist. Their healthcare is based on established standards of care and clinical practice guidelines, which are themselves based on substantial medical research and evidence, as well as decades of clinical practice.
Dr. McNamara even went as far as to suggest that denying these treatments could lead to suicides. That's a pretty hefty claim. But don't worry, Dr. Grossman was right there to deliver a reality check.
I'm going to use my time to respond to Dr. McNamara. First, I'm struck by her use of the phrase, sex assigned at birth. Sex is not assigned at birth. Sex is established at conception, and it's recognized at birth, if not earlier. Dr. McNamara claims that her views are science-based, but to claim that sex is assigned at birth is without any scientific basis whatsoever. Its language misleads people, especially children, into thinking that male and female are arbitrary designations and can change. That is simply not true. Dr. McNamara claims that social and medical interventions are the only evidence-based treatment and that scientific evidence shows it is life-saving. Without it, she's warning us, kids will commit suicide. Well, a growing number of countries have effectively banned the care to which she's referring. And thank God there's been no wave of suicides or other mental health catastrophes.
What's going on with these countries putting limits on medical interventions for minors? Finland, Sweden, the UK, Norway, France, and even New Zealand and Australia seem to think that something's not adding up.
3 years ago, Finland placed strict limitations on medical interventions for minors. Sweden did the same thing after a 14-year-old girl was found to have osteoporosis and spinal fractures from puberty blockers. An investigation concluded, quote, the risks of anti-puberty and hormone treatment for those under 18 currently outweigh the possible benefits.
It's like every time we turn around, another country is saying, hold on, this isn't what we signed up for.
The UK conducted a review and called the evidence very low. They've also placed severe restrictions on the care that Dr. McNamara calls life-saving. Norway also analyzed the data and has made similar changes in policy. The National Academy of Medicine in France warned, quote, great medical caution must be taken in children and adolescents given the vulnerability of this population and the many undesirable, even serious complications the therapies cause. Doctors in New Zealand and Australia have published similar statements. Is Dr. McNamara suggesting that all these countries are rejecting evidence-based treatment and placing their kids at risk of suicide?
Dr. McNamara, though, keeps pushing these treatments like they're the only lifeline for kids. But what about all these countries? Are they all just ignoring the facts and putting kids at risk? Or could it be that they've done their homework and realised that stopping a kid's natural development isn't the answer?
Regarding that point of view, Finland's gender expert, Dr. Rita Kaltiela, said, quote, "It's purposeful disinformation, the spreading of which is irresponsible." All 7 countries, and Florida too, of course, concluded that kids don't need their development interrupted, the girls don't need their periods stopped and their voices lowered, and the boys don't need to grow breasts. What they need is psychotherapy.
Some of the biggest names in the field, like Stephen Levine, Kenneth Zucker, Paul McHugh, and James Cantor. These doctors have been at this game longer than McNamara's been alive. Yet, because they don't fit the current narrative, they're ignored. They're against these treatments because they know what these countries know. There's no proof of long-term benefits, only harm.
I have other objections to Dr. McNamara's testimony. She insists that her position, only hers, represents standard medical care. What she doesn't want you to know is that there is no standard. There's a debate. There's a fierce debate. And on the side opposite her stand such prominent figures as Stephen Levine, Kenneth Zucker, Paul McHugh, and James Cantor, among others. These doctors are giants in the field. They have been treating transgender patients and gathering data and publishing papers about them, and I mean no disrespect here, but since before Dr. McNamara was born. The point is that those veteran clinicians and others who have wisdom and experience are ignored because they disagree with the current narrative. They're against medical interventions for the same reason those 7 countries are. There is no evidence of long-term benefit, but there is evidence of harm. Our precious tax dollars should not support such a perilous experiment.
So why are we throwing our tax dollars at something so risky? It's time to pay attention to what these countries are saying before we let this experiment go any further.
Everybody wants children to be healthy and safe, but their care and what they require to be healthy and safe is expert. We know what we're doing. We know how to do it really well. And all that we ask is that we be allowed to do it without any sort of legal interference.
Dr. McNamara, in your experience, when patients have access to gender-affirming care and can exist in gender-affirming environments, in what ways does this improve adolescent outcomes?
Thank you, Congressman Cardenas, for this question. We have spent a lot of time talking about how vulnerable transgender youth are, but I'd like to take a moment to talk about how privileged I am to be able to care for them and how privileged I am to be part of a larger medical community that does. When transgender youth have unrestricted access to an affirming social environment and to medical treatments that they qualify for and that they desire and that their parents consent to, they thrive. Now, what does it mean for an adolescent to thrive? It means that they're not their gender identity solely. It means that they develop their talents. They get really good at the piano. They learn how to ice skate. They get scholarships to college. They become productive members of our community who will make us stronger for years to come.
McNamara just kept going, spreading that woke agenda like it's the gospel truth. Then, Congressman Dan Crenshaw stepped in, and let's just say, he wasn't having it.
And this is the reauthorization for the Children's Hospital's GME funding. And yes, it's true, this is my bill. And what it does is it withholds funding from these hospitals if they engage in what they call gender affirmation therapy, these physical changes to a child's physiology, permanently disfiguring them through either puberty blockers or even surgical modifications. Now, look, I understand that the other side of the argument here believes they are on the side of compassion, and maybe that's a sincerely held belief. It is just as true that I believe we are on the side of compassion. I think it is indeed compassionate to stop kids from being permanently physically altered based on little to no evidence that it will improve their underlying mental condition.
It's one thing to care about kids, but it's another to turn a blind eye to the damage that can't be undone.
Now, why is this controversial? That's actually beyond me. Not too long ago, I think we all agreed that performing double mastectomies on a 12-year-old girl was wrong. Now it's become a political movement where radical activists have bullied mainstream medical associations and members of Congress into repeating this propaganda. Now, it should be noted that in the public, this subject is actually not very controversial.
I mean, remember when everyone agreed that performing irreversible surgeries on kids was a bad idea?
In fact, a recent poll just last month by the Washington Post showed that 68% of Americans opposed using puberty blockers on children. That's just a question about puberty blockers. Imagine if the question had been about castration or surgical interventions. So you've got to convince me that 70% of Americans are just a bunch of fools that refuse to accept the so-called science. Or maybe, look, I have another theory. Maybe they have a very baseline understanding of ethics and common sense, which tells us that maybe, just maybe, it's a bad idea to submit children to permanent life-altering medical interventions based solely on a temporary ideation about their gender.
Perhaps it's time we let real science and common sense guide the conversation, not political movements or pressure from activists.
Gender affirmation is not science, and there's no evidence-based standard of care. To say that is a lie, or is at best redefining the term evidence-based. What this is a social contagion. It is based in pseudoscience and radical ideologies, and it's sweeping across our country and encouraging children to make irreversible changes to their gender. What's worse, it's coming from adults and institutions who know better, to include our children's hospitals, and institutions that are supposed to be tethered to sound science and their Hippocratic oath of do no harm. Now, maybe I'm an optimist, but I do believe that science and evidence will win out in the end. And in the future, we will look back at these gender-affirming therapies as we now look at lobotomies and electroshock therapies.
When 70% of taxpayers say they don't want their hard-earned cash funding what they see as barbaric treatments on kids, maybe, just maybe, we should listen, shouldn't we?
I have some reason to be hopeful. Notably, Great Britain's National Health Service restricted these clinical interventions for minors just last week. Reviews published in the British Journal of Medicine, the Journal of the Endocrine Society, even in the American Academy of Pediatrics, all cite the lack of evidence. I'm going to submit for the record this review published in the Journal of Endocrine Society that found that there is, quote, low-quality evidence for the idea that hormonal treatment improves quality of life, depression, and anxiety among adolescents. Now, here's the important part. This was a systematic review, which by definition is not cherry-picked data, but it's an all-encompassing review of all the data. It has thoroughly debunked the notion that any of these treatments are, quote, evidence-based, let alone recognized as, quote, standard care. My colleagues are using these terms not as accurate representations of the data, but as propaganda. Now, this funding program is reauthorized every 5 years. It provides taxpayer funds to train resident physicians at children's hospitals across the country. It's true, it's been a bipartisan funding mechanism for years. Let's keep in mind something, though. This is taxpayer money. And when 70% of taxpayers oppose these barbaric treatments on minors, then taxpayer money should not fund it.
If you're concerned about kids getting the help they need, don't worry, they still can. But if you think taxpayer money should fund irreversible treatments with little evidence backing them up, well, that's where we draw the line. And guess what? This isn't just some minor issue, it's the issue.
That's why I'm stipulating that as part of this reauthorization, we will not provide any funding through this program to children's hospitals that push gender transition on minors through puberty blockers, hormone therapies, and surgeries. Let's be clear, because there's another lie that's been told. It does not prevent any mental health therapies at all. Despite these lies being told, it does not prevent those kind of therapies at all. This is the issue of our time. This is a hill we're going to die on. It's too important.
But hold on, it gets better. Mr. Crenshaw is not the one politicizing this. No, that would be the folks who decided kids need radical new treatments with zero solid proof they work.
I want to say a few things first. We keep hearing this is a politicized issue. This is a manufactured culture war. I got to say, we aren't the ones who did that. We aren't the ones that came up with this radical new movement that is performing permanent physiological changes to children with no evidence of any benefits. We didn't start that. We're just trying to stop it because it's crazy. It's a contentious issue, which almost 70% of Americans oppose. So we are just saying here that taxpayer money shouldn't be used for it. That's all. This should not be that controversial of an issue. Questions are for Dr. McNamara. I just want to ask you, honestly, you're not concerned about the unknown effects of puberty blockers, hormones, and surgical interventions in kids, the long-term effects, not concerned about that?
Everything I've said here today comes from a place of deep honesty and conviction for the care that I provide and the community that I'm a part of.
Apparently, some people are too busy cherry-picking data. Systematic reviews, those are the gold standard. And guess what they say? There's great uncertainty about these treatments. That's not coming from some fringe group. It's coming from top medical journals and even the American Academy of Pediatrics.
You've said that we've cherry-picked data. How do you mean by how do you mean that?
So it is very unscientific and flawed to pick a single study or a single statistic and to discuss it in isolation.
Totally agree.
Medical experts are able to talk about all of the evidence as a whole.
Totally agree. So it's good to look at systematic reviews, right? That's the gold standard of evidence when you're trying to understand whether something works or whether it doesn't. So the British Journal of Medicine looked at 61 systematic reviews with the conclusion that, quote, there is great uncertainty about the effects of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries in young people. Journal of Endocrine Society came up with the same conclusion, even the American Academy of Pediatrics. They all cite the lack of evidence. And so here's the thing. If you're doing a therapy and it's, temporary, whatever, fine, maybe let's try it, let's see if it works. But when you're talking about permanent physiological changes, do you not agree, just from an ethical standpoint, that you might want extremely strong evidence of the benefits? And there is no systematic review that states that there is strong evidence of benefits.
Now, when Mr. Crenshaw asked for a single journal that shows strong evidence, what did he get? Crickets. The other side couldn't name a single study. Not one. Instead, they threw out buzzwords like standards of care.
Sir, are you aware of how the quality evidence grading system works and how it's applied?
Yeah, we read through it. That's why I'm citing these journals. So which journal says something different? We should have that debate. Tell me a journal that has done systematic reviews that cites different evidence, that cites strong evidence for benefits of these therapies.
The standards of care were developed based on extensive...
You're not telling me any journal, you're not telling me any study. Don't say standards of care.
Yeah. So...
Tell me one.
The standards of care.
That's the standards of care. That's not a journal, that's not a study. That's not an organization, that's not an institution. You're just saying words.
It's time to wake up. This madness has gone way too far, and it's about time we put a stop to it. Where's the common sense?
My daughter's going to grow up with a father with one eye. And at some point she might say, I want one eye. Right? I identify as somebody with one eyeball. Which, by the way, is far less important than your gender, just physiologically speaking. And so if I take her to the doctor and I say, can you just enucleate that eye for us because she identifies as a one eye, she wants to be just like her dad. What would the doctor say? They'd say, you're crazy and I'm going to have you arrested. That's what they should say. And this is for a physiological intervention that is far less important than your actual gender and your reproductive organs. We have to stop this madness. This has gone too far.
We're not saying stop everything forever. We're just saying maybe we should stop using taxpayer money for something that's not only controversial, but also unproven. Kind of like how the Hyde Amendment works for abortion.
I asked before about what evidence is there that there is benefit for these so-called standards of care? Anyone can say that they have a standard of care, but it has to be based on some kind of evidence and research. And when you've done systematic reviews, which is the gold standard for how you come to a conclusion within the scientific community, systematic reviews of 61 other systematic reviews, and you find little to no evidence that there's benefits for this, maybe you just press pause. Because if we're doing permanent physiological interventions to children that have permanently disfiguring them for some hope of a benefit that is not conclusive, then maybe we should press pause. Because that's all we're saying. Press pause. And actually, that is even less than that. All we're saying is let's not put taxpayer money toward it. Right? This is no different than how this Congress deals with the Hyde Amendment. This is a controversial issue. Abortion is a controversial issue. And so we say, look, we disagree on this, so let's make sure we don't put taxpayer funding toward it. That's all this bill is. Let's not put taxpayer funding towards something that is so obviously unproven and contentious. Actually, I don't even think it's really not that contentious. 70% of Americans oppose it. So it's actually, the American people are pretty much on the side of not doing this.
And then there's this moment when Dr. McNamara is asked a straightforward question. Is an XY chromosome assigned at birth? Her response? You'd think she was asked to solve a riddle. After dodging and deflecting, she eventually admits that they don't routinely test chromosomes at birth.
So, Dr. McNamara, is an XY chromosome assigned at birth?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the nature of your question.
Simple question. Is an XY chromosome assigned at birth?
We often don't do routine chromosome testing on infants.
So an XY chromosome would not be assigned at birth, nor would an XX chromosome, although you say that sex is assigned at birth. There's a lack of scientific evidence regarding the effectiveness of these medical interventions, especially among minors, which is why countries in Europe such as Denmark, Britain, Sweden have described treatments as experimental and are urging doctors to proceed with caution, and why they've changed their guidance.
How on earth does it make sense to support these permanent interventions on children, especially when the evidence just isn't there? If even Europe is pressing pause, maybe it's time we did the same.
The purpose of healthcare is to treat and heal, and it's not of interest at the expense of physical and mental well-being of patients.
And that's how the woke Dr. McNamara got a reality check she didn't see coming. The way she was completely shut down in that debate is more than just a win for common sense. It's a clear sign that wokeness is more than a misguided trend. It's a disease infecting our society. When you're so deep into this ideology that you can't even answer a simple question about basic biology, it's clear something's gone wrong. And when the only defense left is to dodge and deflect, it just proves that this woke agenda can't hold up under real scrutiny.